to the final evening of the 11th annual Gainesville Jewish Film Festival. Our film today was Der Shoymer. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it, or at least had a reaction to it. And discussing the film tonight is Dragan Kuyunzic, a member of the Center for Jewish Studies. Dragan's specialty is film and media studies. He teaches courses on Jews and critical theory, Jews in American cinema, or I'm sorry, Jewish American cinema, Jewish cinema, and also vampire cinema, which should fit in quite well this evening. He's written over 120 articles on critical theory. He has made films, including the recent Frozen Time Liquid Memories, which was screened at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. He is currently working on a book, sorry, it's late for me. Descriptions of East and Central Europe on film. I also want to introduce very quickly a guest this evening joining us all the way from Germany, Natalia Alexion, who teaches at Touro College, on whom we're very hopeful will be joining us at the University of Florida in the fall. Natalia is a specialist on East European history and Holocaust studies. She is the author of The Zionist Movement in Poland, 1944 to 1947, Conscious History, Polish Jewish Historians Before the Holocaust, which will be out in April. And she is currently working on two books, one, Hidden Lives Surviving the Holocaust in Eastern Galicia, and the other, also appropriate, I suppose, on the cadaver affair in the interwar Polish Republic. Thanks so much for joining us, Natalia. And,
thank you.
I'm sure everyone has something to say about this film, but first we are going to hear from Dragan Kuyunzic.
Thank you, Norm, and thank you, Natalia, for joining. And I hope you will improve on my presentation. But you are also very appropriate, given the topics of your book, to speak about this film, which has both a corpse and a survival at the center of the film. So I wrote about 2 pages, it's 10-minute maybe introduction, as is our practice here, and then I will ask maybe Natalia if she wants to add something, and others as well. Thank you all for coming, and I want to thank my students who are joining us tonight. So the Shoymer, The Vigil by Keith Thomas was made in 2019. It is the first film of this American filmmaker, and it is an attempt to film in the genre of horror films, not that often visited by American Jewish or any other American filmmakers in this Jewish tradition. One of the reasons why that is the case with Jewish filmmakers, the filmmaker proposed himself a thesis that the Jewish history has had enough horror, and why add to it? So that explains why there are not that many films about Jewish horror or based in that genre. However, he did try his hand at it, and I think the result, which is quite impressive, is the film which will send a shiva down your spine, as indicates the title of the interview with Thomas in the Jewish Times. It's not mine, it's their own title, Shiva Down Your Spine. It reflects the film in some ways Thomas's life was before becoming a filmmaker. He went through pre-medical studies, he was an English major, he is actually graduate in film studies from my alma mater, University of Southern California in Los Angeles, very respectable graduate school for film. And he was in rabbinical school, which he left, and then had a 10-year stint in a clinical research while writing on the side. He says that I realized I was in rabbinical school that I'm not particularly religious. He says, I do go to an Orthodox shul, but I don't go often, and I'm certainly not frum, end of quote. The film is set in Brooklyn, and he says, if you're making a Jewish horror film, it's gotta be Brooklyn. And indeed, the setting is there in Brooklyn. The film set in a home of a recently deceased Jewish woman, and the original interior largely left untouched, authentic. So I will remind you what happens in the film. Yaakov is told by Mrs. Litvak, so Yaakov is hired as a professional mourner. He's told by the wife of the deceased, Miss Litvak, that the mazik is haunting the premises, and like all ghosts, once taking possession of Yaakov, will never leave him. During the film, we see Yaakov go to the cellar, where he sees a video or film of Mr. Litvak explaining how the mazik has capacity to interrupt the contact between the soul, its emanation as Yeshida, and God. It is also a demon which forces the one possessed to constantly watch backwards at the unraveling of the past by its head being turned in reverse. In that sense, he resembles the Mazek resembles something like Walter Benjamin's Angel of History, whose head is turned to the past and he's blown to the future by the forces of catastrophe. Mazikim, as Rashi, or no less authority than Rashi, wrote, are demons which can take various forms, from disembodied ones, which are called ruhin, to those with body, lilin, which sometimes have wings, or as in the film, gnarled and long arms, the better to grab their victims. The return of the mazik and the insistence with which it returns is a testimony of a trauma we learn in the film. As Freud said, we know there is trauma because first there is a return. So this return indicates, this possessed return indicates that there was trauma. The first traumatic experience is the one we see at the very beginning of the film. In a scorched landscape, suggesting destruction by fire, the pogroms and the Holocaust, a young man is forced by a Nazi officer to kill a woman he loves. We assume. We see that it is a drama and that he's forced to shoot her in the head. And by shooting her, thus buying his own survival and subsequent guilt. That young man is Mr. Litvak, a survivor of the Buchenwald death camp. He says that himself in that filmed projection in the cellar. The other source which makes Yaakov particularly susceptible to being possessed by the mazik, being visited by the demon, is that he himself suffered anti-Semitic violence in Brooklyn, which killed his younger brother, and for which he blames himself for surviving and attributing this to his own cowardice to prevent his brother's death. This guilt made him leave the religious community and is now living a destitute life, going through group therapy for those who left the yeshiva or the religious community to live secular existence, and on occasion hiring himself as a professional mourner. Thus, the Holocaust and anti-Semitism are indicated as the causes of the trauma, eminently combined in the scene where Yaakov chokes and gags on something, which turns to be the hairball. His mouth is full of hair, right, which he pulls out, suggesting both the lock cut from his brother prior to his death by the gang of anti-Semites, and the mounds of hair shorn from the victims of the Shoah, prominently featured, for example, in the classical film about the Holocaust, The Night in Fog. The choking on this hairball, right? The choking, as Sarah Kaufman wrote in her book, Smothered Words, Paroles Suffoquées, is the essential trait of any testimony about the Holocaust. Thus, the Holocaust and anti-Semitism haunt these two bodies, each a survivor, a survivant, and a ghost, a specter, a revenant. The demon appears in the film in the guise of noises, doubles, agitated body of the deceased under the shroud, but also in various technical devices, like the telephone, through which Yaakov reaches not one, but two analysts, one the double of the same one or the other, right? He gets one phone call and then gets another phone call from the same person. So there is a doubling within the prosthetic device of the telephone. And of course, Mr. Litvak himself appears as a cinematic projection on the screen, while at the same time lying in state. Yaakov confronts the demon in a scene which is central to the film and is made actually in the poster. By lighting a candle, wearing a tefillin, and burning the face of the demon, the only way to perform the exorcism is to burn the skin of its face. This burning of the skin may also be an attempt to burn the very surface of the film which he has just seen, the film being itself a transparent skin on which the film is filmed by the light which burns it. So I'm saying there is an inscription on the filmmaking which is also burnt in this scene of burning. So one fire fights the other. The memory is both preserved and liquidated. At the end of the film, Yaakov leaves the house, but is followed by an ambiguous, blurred figure, a rabbi or a mezek. It is left undecided, as the creaking in his hand and arm speaks like a phantom limb of unfinished exorcisms, which in fact may need to be interminable. The film thus engages in the usual protocols of exorcism familiar from the films with the Catholic thematics, The Exorcist and Omen, for example, but by giving it a specifically Jewish twist. The film also marks a turn towards Yiddish in American culture, as utilized at the beginning of Serious Man by the Coen brothers to summon the appearance of a dibbuk. Or The Jewish Police Union, a novel by Michael Chabon, which the Coens wanted to put on screen and in fact paid for the rights to do so, but never did. In both films, Yiddish invokes the lost world of European Jewry by means of Yiddish spoken in the scenes, which haunts the space of the film and the survivors as they are transplanted to the United States. And it is thus that Chabon writes about the Yiddish as the language of phantoms, a phantom limb, titling his essay about the Yiddish, The Guidebook to the Land of the Ghosts. In this essay, in which he reflects on Yiddish language, he tries to imagine the destroyed community of European Jewry and asks, what phrases would I need to know in order to speak to the millions of unborn phantoms to whom I belong? In a similar way, and I will conclude soon, the Shoymer, the vigil, channels an individual trauma of the survival of the Shoah and the individual personal trauma of Yaakov, and the way it jumps generations or can be communicated by a film. By purging the evil spirit with a candle and tefillin while reciting Shema Israel, the film also provokes, at least in me, a more general reflection on destruction and survival as a singular experience of a larger Jewish history. It is a film, and that is no mean feat for a film, which asks questions about the very possibility of testimony, in personal experience, in religious terms, or by means of film. What is fought with the tefillin and the Psalms reciting Shema Israel indicates that what is filmed does not come from the outside of Judaism, but may be an attempt to pacify Judaism's essential guilt, or shuld, essential for its perpetuation and survival. Shuld is also not only guilt, but also debt. What is a debt? Which is essential for its perpetuation and survival. The trauma experienced by Yaakov and Mr. Litvak I would use Kathy Carruth's words in her book on trauma and psychoanalysis, more specifically The Man, Moses, and the Monotheistic Religion, which she discusses. So Yaakov and Mr. Litvak's experience suggests that the Jewish history is not only the passing on of the crisis, but it is the passing on of the survival that can only be experienced within a history larger than any single individual or any single generation, end of quote. So, to conclude, the film perpetuates and feeds on this passing of, I quote Carruth again, the enigma of both destruction and survival, end of quote. So the destruction, source of the trauma, and the survival, that is what is being staged in by this film. And they stand in a kind of ambivalent and ambiguous balance. Is it a rabbi or a mazek, a blurred figure that is following Yaakov in the morning as he's still shaking off the phantom pain from his arm? The director said that he wanted to leave the enigma open and unresolved, and to let the enigma, by means of this film, the ambiguity unpurged, leave the house and follow Yaakov into the world. Thank you. These are some of the reflections I had after watching the film.
Nice.
Now, maybe, Natalia, would you like to supplement a little bit?
Well, thank you, Dragan, so much. I don't know if I can supplement because this was so rich, and I took 2 pages of notes. But I can continue what you got us started on with some of my points of in which this film really touched me and where it resonated. And I agree with everything you said. For me, it was fascinating, this what you mentioned, this very possibility of testimony. The scene with the recording in a basement, I found one of the most striking and unforgettable and disturbing. It really stayed with me much more than the horror, the classic horror sounds and sense of danger. And it also, I kept on thinking now that how much this is unsettling the accounts of survival in general, the accounts of survival of the Holocaust, because arguably Mr. Litvak, although rebuild his family, he lives in the seclusion that he chooses, never really rejoins the community, and whatever family he managed to build, he purges or loses. It's only really his wife and him. And then there is a question of being an outsider and insider by choice or by trauma that he shares with the main character. And again, we talked about the story of Orthodox Jews sort of testing the boundaries of the community in Marry Me, However. And of course, it's a completely different film. But I kept on thinking, to what extent one can leave or be evicted or evict himself from the community because of pain that one experienced. Now, for me also, I kept on thinking, and this is probably because of my literary references, I kept on thinking about Bruno Schulz, and especially in the context of women, this inability to build a connection and attraction that our character feels. And in fact, it was also an incredible scene that the first thing he does when he still feels relatively safe in that haunted house is type, "How do you talk to women?" And then he is constantly paralyzed, and the scenes are semi-animalistic, and which again is so much in the drawings and in the writings of Bruno Schulz. So I somehow had Schulz's shadow in this film. I'm not sure if this was intentional or is it just in my head, but this was the reference that mattered, and this whole relationship of Mrs. Litvak with her husband. I mean, there is a lot that is happening on this male-female connection, lack of connection, ability to communicate. And yes, the scenes, it's interesting that you thought of these blurred scenes from the Holocaust, half nightmare, half memory, half documentary image, because my sense was that somehow that this was a teenage child forced to kill his mother, rather than, again, I should probably talk to my therapist why this was my reference.
Placing on both of your same therapists on the phone. Right?
Indeed. But also what you mentioned, I found incredibly rich in this film, and completely surprising that everything is left open. That really there is no point in which this set of questions and mysteries is somehow solved for us. And I found this making the whole story with all its richness so much more interesting and unsettling again. But I was so happy to see this film, and I kept on thinking about it for all days since. So I'm curious what Jack and other people have to say.
It's a haunting image,
Yes.
What you're saying, it haunts you. And that is when the film itself comes into proximity with its own mode of making, right? So you have this spectrality of the image, and then he enters this kind of weird space, womb-like space, goes towards that light and then scorches it. So there is this kind of film, both exploring the visual and the way of cinematic production, which burns with this image, which you want to retain and eliminate at the same time, right? That is the impossibility of, and in that sense, it's the question of testimony that is put to the test, specifically with the Holocaust. As we, a number of you are specialists in writing on it. The ambiguity and the ambivalence of how to represent something that Shoshana Feldman wrote about, Sarah Kaufman, and so on. I just thought that
and thank you for pointing to the head turn backwards. I did not make that connection between this and being sort of stuck permanently in the past. And
but you see, that is also where the filmic kind of it also invokes its own means of production, because you see the film by being turned. You're pushed by this catastrophe to the future, which is behind you, and you are like that angel of history which witnesses that. So this is kind of the testimony which is both blind and blown away and reversed from the direction of history, right? Cinema puts you in the opposite direction. So in that sense, I always find whenever films come in proximity and problematize their own production, they all of a sudden become enhanced, right? They are more complex. Then they give something to think. It's not just run-of-the-mill film which just uses itself unconsciously, right? He knows what he's making, right?
And I was curious what you thought. You were talking about it, but if I can actually push you on that, what do you make of his repeated paralysis, of his inability to to stretch his arms and his legs refusing to carry him. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, he's himself kind of a phantom limb, right? The bones are phantomaticity of the body. That is what remains of the body when we are no more. Like the last thing that remains are bones. And this creaking, and in the end, he still shakes his, it's a phantom pain, right? That is a phantom pain. That is, you don't know, is it of the body? Is it his? Or is it something haunting him? So I think this is the fact that it's creaking bones, right? Which I insist on, is an inscription of this kind of haunting from within the body, which both prevents him to move, prevents him gags on things. You know, this paralysis is overwhelming. It is this is a body which is a symptom. So the question is what it is a symptom of.
Film that I didn't see.
Oh, this is a Jewish film.
Also didn't want to see. I want to see the other two.
We have a guest.
Maybe they talk a little about the other two. They're not.
I don't know if that satisfies you.
Very
No, I mean, for me, and again, I'm curious what other people.
No, I would like to hear other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was this kind of
Yeah, go ahead.
Sort of being on the verge of losing humanity, losing human form, and I thought of him sort of becoming a cockroach-like, especially when he is turning and twisting on the floor and cannot stand up. But again, this might be just other literary references, and there is that kind of presence of something not quite human.
There is a bug. There is something crawling which startles him. So it's not, this association is not unfounded. But either way, it's a projection of this haunting, of this kind of inability or reducing oneself to this.
Dragan, hold on for a second. Garrett and others, please mute your screen, because if you talk to one another, you come to all of us.
Yes.
Dragan, go ahead. Now you're muted, Dragan.
I'm unmuted.
Okay.
So I think this is of the same order, right? This kind of drawing attention to this crustacean, cracking bones, desiccated body, right? It's a body which has no flesh, which is already posthumous body, or it's an animal body. You know, it could be many things. If you want to go the association of Kafka, which is there, yes,
it's also a possessed body.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need Kafka for it. I think it's the illusion is to some kind of spirit possession.
Yeah, that's what I said.
I want to add something else too, and that is that one of the striking things was the downstairs and the upstairs. Two features. It's fascinating that the screening is taking place downstairs. You know, and to me, it was a very horrific scene. It was a very frightening scene that it goes down there.
He's going into a cellar, but never up on the floor. He never goes up, right? It's always the first floor.
Well, he goes to see Mrs. Litvak.
Yeah,
that's true.
And they do go.
That's true. Yes. He goes.
Yeah, that could be
upstairs.
And it's interesting. She has these hair
wigs,
huh?
wigs, shaitels.
Yeah. So with this choking, you know, and these wigs, it's also kind of these indications of survival, right? This is the leftovers of other bodies. Stunning kind of into cinematic talent.
When I first saw the film, I was a little uncertain about it. One thing that struck me in rewatching it, and I'm still a little uncertain about the narrative, by the way. But one of the things that does strike me about it, and it struck me about it certainly rewatching it, I thought that the casting was very good and the acting was very good. Mrs. Litvak is fantastic. I really love her as a character. And, you know, and his Rebbe, whoever, what's his name again? The one who gives him the job to be the Shoymer. I love him. I mean, I really, I love his Yiddish and I love his character in general. And then the main character too, I felt in rewatching him, he's actually quite good. He's a good actor, and he plays his part very well, very convincingly. So
These are Belzer, right? I was not sure about the heads, but I thought this was Belzer
I don't know
outfits.
how many Belzer there are in Borough Park. I
A
don't know.
lot,
There
a
are.
lot.
There are.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know about after COVID, but
Mhm.
I had a question for the two of you, and thanks for your comments. I found them really interesting, but I sort of had two nagging things that maybe you can answer. One, the guilt on the part of Litvak and the guilt of the part of the main character are really asymmetrical. You know, on his part, it's almost a fictional guilt because the Nazis didn't give guns to Jews on the Eastern Front, and they essentially turn him into a perpetrator in ways that this just didn't happen, other than you know, using Jews for spotting and informing and stuff like that. And so it's a guilt that's beyond, way beyond the normal survivor Holocaust guilt, and I'm wondering if that kind of you know, almost fictionalization was necessary. But the other thing is, it's really asymmetrical to, you know, something that just kind of happens on the street that could, you know, whereas, you know, it's just nobody's fault, and that kind of, you know, this moment of indecision and all of that. And I was just curious what you thought about it. Is it a case of you know, just guilt is guilt and that sort of thing? But the other thing that kind of nagged at me was that when we meet her, we're told that she has Alzheimer's, and yet she's the most lucid person in the entire film. And I'm curious what you thought of that.
Well, it is true that this scene is excessive, right? But I would say it's not completely without, let's say, cinematic reference, where like in Sophie's Choice, right? The mother has to choose. And
that's also not very probable scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know, if you want to condense this kind of perverse enjoyment of the Nazi, it's a film. It doesn't have to, you know, it has to be the way it could have happened and not the way it happened, you know, as Aristotle says in his Poetics, right? It has to be the way it could have happened. So in that sense, it's believable. It's some kind of perversion, sadistic perversion that is being
I think it's a metaphor. I don't think this is a representation of his guilt for shooting his beloved or his mother. I think it's surviving and leaving other person behind, and in that sense, I think it was, yes, in some way they come from completely different order of things, but it is about not fighting back in both cases. He's not feeling guilty, the young man, I think, about the fact that his brother runs into the street, but that he let the perpetrators oppress him, and that he was paralyzed by fear and desire to survive himself. So it's an interesting,
or maybe not even the desire, but the very fact that he survived.
But it creates a parallel that is crucial to the structure of the film, because without it, nothing really makes much sense.
It wouldn't be susceptible to the D-book because he has similar phantom.
Right.
He's exposed to this phantomatic return,
Yeah,
ghost haunting.
and it's
And
not
what
a
about
D-book.
her? Sorry.
It's not a D-book.
Not the D-book, yeah.
It's another kind of demon.
Yeah.
Keep your demons straight.
But it's also, you know, in the Coen brothers, also this ambiguity at the beginning. Is it a D-book or is it a holy man, right? And then at the end, when they have credits, they put the character of D-book and the quotation mark, unresolved, right? The D-book was that actor.
It's one of the weaknesses of that film, I thought, that they took liberties with spirits that I didn't appreciate.
Well,
Well, The spirits, I think, are essential, because when I first started, I hadn't pre-screened this one, so it was a big surprise. And as I was watching the opening and the sort of creepy supernatural, we were laughing because we were like, perfect, you're gone, right? But right, that the whole nature of the fantastic, of course, is that instability, and the structure is absolutely fantastic. It keeps you in an unsettled position. Home is what has to be more creepy than the creepy. So you have the supernatural, but you always have these potential rational explanations. So the beginning, you think it's ghosts that are going to be the monsters, when in fact, no, it's actual Nazis who are the monsters. And then you have obviously the doubles that you talked about with the doctor doubling, but the doctor and the rabbi double, and the universes are double, because as soon as you get past the cold open, what do you have? You have the religious universe, well, the secular universe, then the religious universe. And all of these constant, mirrorings always make home more unsettling than whatever mystical danger there is. It's actually the humans that are the monsters that are more frightening, whether it's the boys who beat up his little brother, leaving him impotent and filled with guilt, or the Nazis. And then the other play on double universes, though, that I got a kick out of, and I know only some of you will, is that the woman who plays Mrs. Litvak is this creepy character who is knows about these supernatural beings. But for those of us who know Sex and the City, she's Magda. She is right. I see you laughing. So I was constantly between these two universes to do, and I was surprised at how basically it did it, and it was still pretty successful. I thought, but it was a big surprise, and I don't know how many of you recognized Magda.
But is she the actress, really? No.
Yeah, Magda. So here you have her in this really creepy haunted role in this double universe, and then she's ¿cómo se llama el técnico? Miranda's cleaning lady who finds Miranda's things in her room. So it was also kind of odd.
Borrow an actor, this line of association follow the actor. It's not without base.
Well, she's not Magda from the film. She's Magda from Sex and the City. So it's very, very different universes. Yeah.
Well, by the way, if I might ask you, Gail, did you like the film?
I did for this. I did.
Yeah, I asked for a reason. I hesitated showing you the film because I thought you were going to say, no, don't you?
No, I did, because I was surprised. I was surprised. And then, for when you teach fantastic novels or fantastic novellas a lot, it was fun to watch just how crafted it was, and how many times, and how much, well, as Alexa put it, overkill there was. So we had fun with it. Did I like it as a film? I thought it was interesting. Yeah. What about the students?
Oh, well, they don't have to speak, but if anybody wants to join, we don't see you all. There is no room to see a raised hand. Hannah says, I really enjoyed the film. Yeah.
Did you watch it alone or did you watch it with friends?
Are you asking Hannah?
Yeah.
Hannah, will you speak alone? She's shy.
Are you frightened at all?
I lost my
Not frightened, huh?
Scared speechless.
Right.
Yeah. Joking. No, on horror doesn't affect me.
I think James has his hand up.
Oh, James does? Okay, speak. But you have to call. Yeah. Can you speak? James.
Oh, hello.
Yes.
I guess I wanted to ask, because you had brought it up briefly before we had talked about it and super in depth, was that I found it really interesting that the demon acts through technology through so much of the film, specifically because of our conversation about the way that the first computers were used in the Holocaust as a cataloging device. So the fact that this sort of traumatic representation of that experience acts through like digital technology and like cell phones and stuff like that, I thought was really like, I mean, I've seen like horror movies that use technology as part of the spooks before, and it's like certainly maybe a little bit silly sometimes, but I thought it worked here way better than it normally does because of that legacy. And so I was interested if I'm like alone in thinking that, or if there's some kind of connection to the use of like technology in the horror.
Well, that's a, spectrality of the technical is parallel to these ghosts, right? It's ghosts are part of the film. I mean, there is no film without spectrality. So that in that sense, it's image one is an image of another. But in the history of horror films, television, for example, is often used as in Poltergeist, right? As a source, the ghosts come from the TV, and they grab you in, or, so there is that is an attempt for this film establishes what is spectral about it, but also tries to purge it. But it doesn't quite purge it, because to the end it's ambiguous, right? It wakes up and the end there is coffee at the end, right? So are you up for a coffee? But then he shakes his hand, right? So we don't know, is he the hand which writes? Who is writing this, right? Is it the phantom who is writing, or is it he? So that ambiguity is left open. It's not quite. Otherwise, it would be a very conservative thing to do. That is how horror films are resolved into normality. You purge the space from its doubling, from this haunting, right? It's always this kind of a lens. The final scene is the scene in which that has been.
You burned the place down.
Or you burned the place down. There was that as well in the film. You burned the face.
But what bothered me was the flickering lights early on. I thought, come on, this is so tacky. I really don't do that. And I don't know why he did that, because it I think took away from an otherwise rather sophisticated film.
Yeah, well, it's the first film,
He's playing with all of the commonplaces, so you have the overkill. But in terms of the technology, the phone, a great moment was that, again, old and new worlds, where he knows he's supposed to be doing Psalms and not being on his cell phone. And he says, I shouldn't be on the phone. And then she says, I'm sorry. And what does he say? It's okay. So of course we cracked up, but it's that constant tension between the old world and the new reformed secular world that's playing out in there. So absolutely. And then of course the film scene with technology.
Gail, it's also doing a very common trope in horror films. It's introducing sex into horror.
Well, yes, but of course when he calls Sarah, when she comes on the phone, right? What does she turn into, right? This monster, right? An accusatory monster who's going right back to that, double of impotence, guilt. So yeah.
But cell phones, which are Apple product, they have a product also called the tablet, right? It is all technical emanation of a very old biblical narratives of the inscription of the laws by fire on the stone, for example, which are then translated into technology, computer technology, right? This is writing on the sand. We see each other because sand is being burnt on our screens, right? The silicate is burnt in the screen. So there is a repetition in technology of what is a very old biblical tradition, which is after all happening also in the desert, in the Silicon Valley. So it's not by chance that these parallelism pop up. It's related to digital technology.
You guys have a couple of questions in the chat
Yeah.
On bones. Can you look in the chat?
The breaking, couldn't explain, but we talked about those bones and the breaking of the bones. It has this kind of transformation maybe into a bug, this skeletal feeling of the body, right? Being a monster haunted by forces which break the bones from within, right? And the bones themselves are an inscription of posthumous in the living. The bones are what lives on after we die, right? Alas.
Yeah,
or he was under medicated. I mean, I like the fact that we don't really we also have this dropped as a
Ativan.
But that's what makes it fantastic. The fact that there's essentially a rational medical explanation for this. And interesting is he starts by going to the doctor first. I'm going to go to the modern expert to see what's going on. And I took my pills, and then that doesn't work because there's a double doctor, and then Litvak appears twice. And then he calls the Rebbe, right? So I can't get an answer from one. I'm going for the other. And whenever he gets scared, what does he do? He either recites the Shema or he goes and lays tefillin.
But reciting Shema seemed to work.
Cut that. Yeah.
Good to know.
Did you find it to be a redemptive ending or not then? I mean, I found it to be a redemptive ending, and I don't much care for redemptive endings in Holocaust films, but you all seem to be saying that it was more ambiguous than that.
Oh, it's a horror film. You expect a redemptive ending. That's how this.
I don't like horror films. I mean, I watch this, so I don't see a lot of them. My first and only date with somebody in high school was when I left in the middle of The Exorcist. So
no wonder you
I'm not a horror film person. So
I remember a date I had when I went to see Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And when she
Wow.
got out of my car, I locked every door in the car.
No, well, we shouldn't recall all the bad dates.
But the ending is ambiguous because
That's
there's
another
a
movie.
word out of focus, ambiguity. He's followed by this creature, which I first missed. But then I read in the interview that he said he's asked, what about? Is it the rabbi or is it the Mazik? And he says, I'll leave it open.
It's ambiguous because of the Shoymer 2 is coming next year.
No,
Precisely. No, I think he's now inhibited he's the next victim.
He's filming a King novel. What's his name? King. Stephen King's novel. Yeah, he's filming one of the Stephen King's novel. He was hired after this, so he's here to stay.
There's that, and you have to leave it in crisis. You can't have a cathartic moment. So the maybe is maybe I'm coming back, and maybe the Shema and maybe the tefillin did help me, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah. I think there is an ambiguity. It's not completely redemptive.
I'm not sure he's got enough material there for a second film. I wouldn't worry about that. So,
It was interesting to me that the film is marketed probably to the Jewish film festivals as the Shoymer, where everywhere else is the Vigil. And there's actually a few films on the program that had different names. Kiss Me Kosher, I think it was distributed in the world as Kiss Me Before It Blows Up.
right.
So they changed a few titles of the film to kind of.
We changed it.
Oh, you changed it.
I don't remember what this. Virginia's not here. I don't remember what the title was that they were pushing, but I really hated it.
The Vigil?
The Vigil.
Yeah.
And I hated it. I thought this was
That's
this representation of the story. And and I thought, like, for a Jewish film festival, it should be the Shoymer. It should be the Yiddish term also, not the Hebrew. So same with Kiss Me Kosher. Virginia caught it right away. It's a brilliant title because it speaks to what's his name?
Shakespeare.
No, the songwriter, the great American songwriter, who said his great claim to fame, among other things, is America's only great songwriter is not Jewish. What's his name? Cole Porter.
Okay. Oh yeah.
It's also interesting that this is also set up as psychoanalytic scene, which allows the reflection on Freud and mourning and melancholia also.
Mhm.
So it has there are many venues one can approach this. Is it a scene of successful mourning, or is it a kind of is the film engulfed in this melancholic embrace and just will keep repeating the loss, the return,
It's the latter. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what's there.
Yeah, there is that, if it's melancholia, then it's not successful closure. Then it will keep coming as an opening in front of us, an abyss.
I still want to know why she's represented as having Alzheimer's in the beginning. I mean, it's just some horror thing where, she says all these things that no one understands, so they think she has Alzheimer's, or is there?
Yeah,
There's some more to it.
You have Gail.
I think you have to have that play between the rational explanation, which is how rational people would explain it. But then as you learn more, you learn that she's voyant, she sees, right? She immediately knew it wasn't going to work out for him. So it's supposed to leave you in that tension. Is it Alzheimer's? Is he really on Ativan? Was it what he was taking or something? Or, so
Everybody smiles at the mention of Ativan.
the play between the supernatural and that scientific explanation, which, plays out in every double in the film. Yeah. Double universes, Jewish universe, non-Jewish universe, secular, non-secular.
Secular, non-secular, yeah. Yeah, medical explanation is what would lead to normality. Okay, then he takes active and she has Alzheimer's, right? But then it doesn't work. I mean, it's not sufficient, right? Because another ambiguity opens. So
I'm a big horror fan, and I've heard about this film before the festival because I'm following all kinds of horror forums and groups on, and actually it gets a lot of interest out there, in the horror fan world. People liked it a lot. I think they liked a lot the fact that it's a horror film that it's a film about possession, but it doesn't use the regular Christian Catholic sort of trends, and I think people are thirsty for that. One of the things that kept coming up, and maybe the students who don't know a lot about the Hasidic world, people were confused a little bit. I noticed about kind of the background of the plot. They didn't understand exactly. I guess if you're not, they didn't understand what is the meaning of somebody to get out of the Orthodox world. Why was it so hard for him? Why does it generate a film? I mean, that wasn't clear for a lot of people outside of the of the Jewish world that I kind of noticed, horror fans that enjoyed the film. Yeah, I think because the rabbi, I mean, it seemed that the rabbi had something more sinister. He didn't just look for a Shoymer, right? He might have known that something's going in this house, and that something would.
Yeah, he did know because the other guy he had ran away.
And also, we're looking at this. We're not supposed to look at this. You're not supposed to know who's there. Hever Gadisha is secret precisely because it's secret. So we've already entered into a sort of taboo environment where, you know who the people are and you could thank them or not thank them. So, from the beginning, that's strange.
I thought he was a...
Shoymer's a little different in the Hever Gadisha.
Right, but you don't really know who's doing Psalms at night. Most people you never find out. So, it's that other side of death that we don't really want to see or look at and don't focus on. I'm sorry, Natalia.
No. I thought that he was a sort of also an actor of attempted possession, right? I mean that he's trying to draw him back to the world that he chose to leave behind.
He did.
yeah.
You mean the rabbi?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. A very interesting observation. But he doesn't really he doesn't commit to coming back, does he?
Well, he says not this morning.
He says, yep. He says not this morning, maybe. And he says the Shema at key moments, and that reassures him. And he lays tefillin, and that gets him to the morning.
I'm sorry. You would have said the Shema there too, and you also would have put up tefillin.
He's also working through the trauma of separation from the religious community. I mean, it starts with the scene of working through the trauma. It's a psychoanalytic scene, collective group. They are all former, members of the community, and they are like.
And I would have used garlic and a cross too, if it would help. Anything.
But he remains double. He remains, Tali's right, haunted as he leaves. That he's never going to live a non-double universe there. Yeah.
The rabbi's a pretty sinister figure at the beginning. He's smoking under a lamppost like some film noir character, and
and the other guy
just says, "I'm going to call the police if you don't go away." It's
like he's a gangster.
Yeah.
And
there's a whole money negotiation that I thought also was kind of interesting.
Right.
Yeah, that was great because he knew he needed money and he wanted him to need money and he wanted him to bargain. So yeah, those
Yeah,
were
what a
great.
bargaining. I'll give you 2. I want 5.
That was where like the film is hyperbolic, like it's
No,
absolutely
of course,
playing up. Yeah,
great. That was funny, actually. There was a
It
little.
was.
yeah. Even the Rebbe under the light, you know, as the criminal.
Well, the rabbi is the hero of the film, right? Whatever it's called. What's the name of the film on the guy who's trying to get a wife?
Menashe.
Menashe. Yeah.
Menashe.
He's
That's
terrific.
Menashe,
Really.
Menashe Lustig. That's that same character. That character was the rabbi.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a well-known kind of face. And so also is associated with the Holocaust, with the burning at the beginning. I mean, there are all sorts of, fumes,
Yeah.
all sorts of fires and fumes.
I also, I mean, this is a side to a side to a side, but I was also puzzled by how women's stories are completely absent. You know, we don't know what the story of the coffee girl is. I mean, she obviously left earlier and she's already coping, you know, she can hug the opposite sex. And Mrs. Litvak, we don't know if she's a fellow survivor or not. And then the woman slash beloved in a execution scene, there is really complete silence on that.
Right.
Yeah, the
And
film,
really, it's all men. I mean, the Chevra Kadisha.
they're Orthodox, but the film opens with commenting on the male gaze, right? She's
Yeah.
talking about that man who looks.
Yes. Oh, that. Oh, yeah. I forgot about it. That's a great one.
Yeah.
It's a great dialogue.
Yeah, but you're right. It doesn't really go anywhere.
It doesn't, yeah.
It's funny. I mean, you see, that was part of the film where I felt was weaker than elsewhere. I thought, her naivete and the ways in which she's describing it and the way people were reacting to it, I didn't care for the writing that much. And it made me feel the film is weaker in certain respects than it is in other respects.
Of that girl who spoke at the beginning. That's what you.
It's okay, but I didn't think that they presented it that well. That's all.
I thought it was great because it was misleading. I mean, I thought it was going, yes, I knew the title, but I thought I recognized the genre as sort of social cultural commentary. And because there have been films made, those stories, unorthodox and such. And then so the horror actually left me completely by surprise, and I was watching it late at night, and I ended up waking up my husband because I didn't want to be alone with the mazik.
I could not get anyone to watch with me. So.
No, the only promise of a normalcy is that coffee at the end, right? Sarah is inviting him into a life which is awake. Right? How about coffee? Right? So that's a kind of hint.
If it's her.
It's a hint, yeah, because she also appears as this banshee. Yeah.
It can be all kinds of things.
Yeah, and he's followed by the mazik, maybe. So yes, ambiguity is there. But let's say that there are hints of where feminine is what receives and maybe invites some kind of normalcy or stability or curing or healing and so on. Maybe it's discreet. Right, absolutely. This is a film made by men, right? But at least it's conscious of the male gaze, of the complications. It's not, in that sense, it's not, I feel it's a kind of choice of the theme dictates how much of women will be present. But where they are in the end, this is. How about coffee? Wake up.
No, but I was trying to gaze at the pictures on the walls in the house, sort of get the story from the artifacts. But you could see these were old family photos and stuff, but you really couldn't. There was really no footnotes to help.
That reminds me
to slow it down and catch yourself. Same with the furniture in the house, the furniture in the living room.
Authentic furniture from the previous tenant who passed away, an old woman. But what I was having associations in this context, the wall, and then the wall downstairs in the cellar is full of it's like the Holocaust Museum, right? which with these pictures, like the National Museum in Washington, with all these pictures on the wall, right? These are pictures, of those who are, perished, especially downstairs. It's obviously he's putting on the wall, pinning on the wall pictures of people.
Ah,
You understand, from the Buchenwald, that is the kind of commemorative cellar, where this.
I thought it was investigative walls, like in
But you see that this is like faces.
No, you're right. I think you're right.
Attributes with the beards, names underneath, right? And so that kind of is replicated in that stairwell and these pictures. So I had these associations. This is part of this invocation of the photography. There is a moment, Gail, right, when he opens a photograph. And we understand this is a survivor looking at someone who has departed, right? Who is perished, right? Not here anymore. So that is part of that kind of associative chain, which implicates technology, photography, spectrality of the media, right?
Yeah,
Whereby the testimony is necessary. Part of the testimony is technology, but you want to purge it because it is technology, it is prosthetic, so insufficient. That is how I thought of that. That cellar totally looks like some kind of commemorative shrine. I don't know. And with film, right? And from that film, he watches that wall. So it's interesting, right? He watches from the film, he watches the wall, the character of Litvak.
And Mrs. Litvak is there as well.
And Mrs. Litvak, who tells him, look behind you, right?
So we didn't talk that much about sound, like it's one thing we didn't, and the sound was really over the top, I thought. But one of the things that I thought was interesting, I don't know what others noticed, but that it was, when it was supposed to be at its most creepy, whoever the sound engineer was, took things that are from everyday life and defamiliarize those. So early on, it's the train sound. It's not some foreign sound that's scary. Well, very early on, it's the guns, right? We hear all these creepy things, but they're not as creepy as when we hear the automatic weapons starting to fire. And then the next creepy sound isn't a ghost sound, because you get those woo 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 synthetic sounds, but it's a train sound.
Yeah.
That's rendered odd. There was another moment where I thought, when he starts to panic in the house.
And where is the train sound?
And you see on the left of one of the shots, right? You're going to hear, it's early on. It's not long after the cold open and the credits. So you have the train, and you don't realize it's a train, but it's the train that's rendered, that's defamiliarized. And then there's,
is it in New York? Is it in Brooklyn?
Yeah, it's the elevated subway.
It's in Brooklyn. It's on the So, and then there's this other moment where he panics in the house. And there's a synthetic sound, but if you listen to the rhythm of the sound, it's done at heartbeat, at accelerated heartbeat. So it's supposed to be his heartbeat. And I didn't get to pay attention to that many others, but every one of them was a natural daily occurrence sound that was defamiliarized into the monstrous, more or less, rather than ghosts. Yeah.
Well, when it comes to trains in a film which invokes Holocaust, that is,
Right, most iconic sound.
Essential trait, yeah. And then it becomes even more,
which makes it
ominous.
More unhomey.
Yeah. I did not notice the train, but I will go back and listen.
And the heartbeat, the number of times they use the heartbeat and accelerate it.
And this screeching sound on the floor with cracking bone, reconstituted. Oh, that is where he looks like an insect, by the way. This turns into an insect limb or something, because it's unrecognizable as a human limb. So there is a metamorphosis there. He plays on Kafka, yeah, definitely.
There's also these ghost stories, not necessarily Holocaust bone piles, but into the 19th century, fin de siècle, Marcel Schwab has one where he's got this replay of the terror, and he's got an automated razor machine that's going around. They're pulling out people door to door, okay, and the text is from the 1890s, cutting their heads off with the guillotine. And then there's mounds of bones, and then their horses, their mechanized guillotine goes over with horses, and you hear the crackling sounds. So you already had those sort of macabre massacre scenes from the commune that had sort of penetrated in their bones, and they're actually writing it only 20 years later in the 1890s, and the commune's in 71. So there is a sort of common place for that horror of bone piles and going over them especially.
Oh, but bone sound is essential from the beginning of the film. The first Disney films are about the skeletons playing on themselves, like xylophone. Skeletons, that's the first Disney film is skeletons. And they play on each other's skulls. And so this kind of...
The bones and skeletons speak to the pornography of death. Right?
Yeah.
You can't have Halloween without skeletons.
Yeah.
Well, this is it, folks. This is the last film.
Yeah, everybody. 12 films in 2 weeks. It seems like a very long time ago. We were watching Baranov, but we're through the 11th film festival. I want to thank a number of people very quickly. Jack Kugelmas really puts this together every year and looks at an awful lot of films to help choose the ones that we see. Dragan Kuyunzic, Gail Zachman, Maureen Tarim screened a lot of these films. It's very time-consuming work to come up with the very best ones we can. The logistics of this thing I've discovered over the last 2 years are really, really tough. And Virginia Hersick makes it look very easy. Believe me, it's not. It's really something, the work she's done on this. And, it was another very successful and enjoyable festival. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I'd like to thank Natalia for coming to so many films, because this is the first time we've had people view from Germany, I think. And and it's demanding to come to these things, because I think it's what, 2:45 in the AM almost over there. And as Pesach is nearly upon us, the only thing I can really think to say is that though Elevant is very convenient during a pandemic, next year in the Hippodrome.
Thank you all.
So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Dragan.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good
Virginia.
night.
And thank you, students. Thank you, my class. They're leaving already. Okay, thank you.
Good job, Dragon.
And thank you. Oh,
Professor,
yes,
can you send me or my
we
group?
are live. You realize we have audience. Just kidding. Yeah, it's okay. What do we want me to send you?
That interview that you were talking about from the director.
Okay.
Sounds fascinating. It would
Just
help.
send me an email. Thank you. Okay, we'll leave you to wrap up